Beyond the outer rim of Delta 9, amidst drifting shards of stone and twisted metal, lost within the shattered remnants of an ancient asteroid belt, a lone pilot named Dalen Voss stepped into a moment that destiny never warns of. He was a quiet military medic, a simple man who only wished to deliver medical supplies and return to the Central Earth Mother Coordination Camp. But the distress signal, pulsing desperately through the static warped comms, struck him harder than any order etched into his mind. Dalen's ship veered off course, drawn into a search trajectory, and before him floated an escape pod, adrift in the burning wreckage of a vessel freshly torn apart by violent explosion. Inside that pod was not a soldier, nor a fugitive, but a girl, an alien form, her skin translucent, faintly shimmering like stardust pressed into glass, and every strand of her hair glimmered like a constellation frozen in the dark. But she was nearly dead. A shallow, fragile pulse in her chest, her legs utterly paralyzed. Dalen pulled her from the wreckage the way one might retrieve a fragment of a soul, torn, discarded, from the dust of the void. He did not know who she was, only that she was alive, and to him, that was enough. 30 hours passed. She awoke within the cramped medbay of his humble ship, surrounded by the hum of systems and the muted glow of overhead lights. "I am still alive." Her voice was thin, as fragile as a leaf on the wind. Dalen's voice was quiet, a tone reserved for speaking to the broken. "You are. Beautiful things are meant to live." But what he did not expect were her eyes. There was no fear in them, no tragedy, only a cold, distant calm, sharp enough to wound. As if the world had long taught her the lesson of being abandoned. She called herself Lysovine, and Dalen Voss knew in that single moment that this journey would change them both forever. Dalen Voss never thought he would come face to face with a man like him, Chiron Solus, the ruthless sovereign of Artheus, and the blood father of Lysovine. Artheus was no place for love. It was a world where glory and power crushed every trace of humanity. And Chiron Solus, the absolute emperor of that world, Nanouden, regarded everything by its worth and utility. Lysovine, the daughter who had lost her legs in a tragic accident, to him, was nothing more than broken property. When the colossal imperial warship, bearing the crest of the royal house, descended into the space near Dalen's modest vessel, it felt as though the entire universe held its breath. Dalen stood at the ready as Chiron Solus emerged, tall, imposing, as cold and immovable as the cliffs of ancient worlds. Eyes of pale silver gray, void of even the faintest warmth for his own flesh and blood. "You're the one who saved her?" His voice, dry, metallic, like iron scraping across stone. Dalen stood between him and Lysovine, who sat quietly in her mobile chair, fragile, yet unyielding. "She is a person," Dalen said calmly, "not some possession to be taken on a whim." Karen's lips curled, the smile of a tyrant who believed in nothing but domination. "You are mistaken," he said. "To me, she is no longer of the royal blood. She is discarded waste, broken beyond worth. And because you saved her, she is now your burden." Then he spoke the words that cut sharper than any blade. "I grant her to you, like one might gift a useless offering to a fool lost in dreams." Lysovine didn't react, but Dalen saw her hand, clenched tight against the armrest. Her eyes were a silent abyss. The eyes of someone who had learned to endure a lifetime of being cast aside. But Dalen, without hesitation, answered him with a single sentence, a sentence that would echo across the stars. You are wrong. I do not accept people. I only walk alongside those who choose to stay. And she belongs to no empire. She belongs to herself. Karen Solis turned and left, without looking back. To him, anything beyond control was unworthy of existence. But Dalen knew a new era had begun to crumble, and Lysiane, she had not fallen. Within her burned a light that even her own father had never seen. After Chiron Solis, the cold, ruthless king of Artheus turned his back and left. The air within the ship seemed to thicken into silence. Dalen Voss stood still for a long while before turning back to look at Lysiane, the girl fate had so cruelly thrown into the orbit of his life. She sat there motionless, her eyes calm like the surface of an undisturbed lake. But Dalen knew, deep within her soul, a storm was raging. Lysiane, he called softly. She didn't answer. Only her slender fingers tightened around the armrest of her seat, so hard her knuckles turned white. Dalen lowered his voice, not as a rescuer, not as a medic, but like someone who had lived too long with loneliness. A man like him will never understand your true worth, and you never needed him to define it. You don't belong to any throne, you belong to yourself. That sentence, simple as it was, cut clean through the invisible chains that had bound Lysiane all her life. There were no tears, no smile, only the faintest nod, like she was reaching for something impossibly distant. Freedom. Days passed aboard the hollow sun, Dalen's ship, drifting through quiet space. He didn't ask much. She didn't speak much. But each day Lysiane began to move, little by little, within the limits her broken body would allow. Clumsy, faltering motions, but determined. There was a moment when she collapsed onto the cold floor. Dalen didn't rush to help, but when she lifted her head, their eyes met, and in his gaze she saw no pity, only patience, and a respect deeper than words. On the 7th night aboard the ship, while Dalen was repairing an auxiliary power unit, Lysiane, with all the effort she could summon, wheeled herself into the cockpit. Could I learn to pilot the ship? She asked, her voice rough but her eyes blazing with a strange new light. Dalen let out a quiet laugh, a rare smile from a man of few words. If you want to, on this ship, no one gives orders. Anyone can learn anything they choose. And that was the moment Lysiane realized she needed no throne, no crown, no royal blood. Here in this small ship drifting between stars, for the first time, she was simply herself, a learner, a survivor, a free soul. And this place, where no throne existed, was the first ground she would build her new life upon. Not a princess, not a sacrificial offering. Just Lysiane, the girl who belonged to no throne, but was finally learning to belong to herself. The hatch of the hollow sun closed behind them with a faint echo, a whisper lost to the endless vacuum of space. Inside, Lysiane sat quietly in her chair, staring into the vast, starless black beyond the ship's window, the cold emptiness of the galaxy staring right back at her. Dalen Voss busied himself with the technical systems of the ship, but even as his hands worked, his eyes never truly left Lysiane. He knew better than anyone. The scars on one's skin were nothing compared to the scars carved deep within the heart. She had turned off her emotions long ago, surviving not as a princess of the Grand Arthea's royal bloodline, but as discarded waste, abandoned to drift in the empty expanse of the stars. But Dalen was not the kind of man to tear open those old wounds. He left her in peace, to sit with her silence, to live within the boundaries of her own fragile world. The first days aboard the Hollow Sun were nothing short of a crucible for Lysovine. She learned to maneuver her powered chair, slowly, clumsily. She learned how to open the storage compartments by herself, how to pour herself a drink, how to tend to the scars and injuries on her own body. Everything on the Hollow Sun was unfamiliar. Everything was new. A life without chains, without orders, without anyone forcing her to be something she was not. And somewhere in those quiet days, for the first time in her life, Lysovine began to understand what true freedom actually felt like. One night, alone, in front of the old fogged-up mirror by the small washroom, a single tear traced down her cheek. It wasn't the tear of a princess disowned by her bloodline. It wasn't the tear of a victim left behind. It was the tear of a human being who still wanted to live. And the Hollow Sun? This small weathered ship, this vessel lost among the stars, had become her home. A home with no golden throne, no silver crown, only scars, scars that were slowly, painfully, healing, in silence, and in a life that, for the first time, was waiting patiently, just for her, inside the Hollow Sun. Time moved slower than anywhere else in the galaxy. No noise, no commands, no eyes watching Lysovine with the sharp, judgmental gaze of the royal court anymore. Dalen Voss worked quietly in the engineering bay. The sound of tools tapping against metal echoed through the ship. Steady, calm, neither rushed nor cold, just like the way this man existed in the world. Lysovine leaned against the large observation window, the only place where she could look out into the endless sky drifting past. Out there, the stars drifted slowly in silent procession, and for the first time in her life, Lysovine realized this universe was vast beyond comprehension, and she was so incredibly small. But within that smallness, something strange had begun to stir in her heart. There was no more fear, no more bitterness, only emptiness. The emptiness of someone who had been stripped of every title, every identity, and yet for the first time in her life was no longer chained down by anything. Lysovine began moving more around the ship. Her wheelchair was still clumsy. Sometimes she bumped hard into the steel walls. Sometimes she fell, collapsing painfully onto the cold, hard floor. Dalen saw everything, but he never stepped forward to catch her, because he knew that wasn't what Lysovine needed. What she needed was respect in his eyes, silence from someone who understood, and that every small movement forward was already a victory. The 10th night aboard the Hollow Sun. Lysovine sat beside the control panel, watching intently as Dalen plotted the star map, programming the next navigation route. I want to learn this. Dalen turned toward her, and this time, he didn't smile. Are you sure? This is a star chart for navigating the wild sectors. It's nothing like the royal maps you once knew. She nodded. Her silver eyes burned with a determination that was both fragile and terrifyingly fierce. Then let's begin. In that moment, Dalen knew. Lysovine was no longer a princess. She was becoming an apprentice, a survivor, someone who was about to rewrite her life story, but with her own scarred hands. There were no thrones aboard the hollow sun, only scars, and the people who stitched themselves back together to keep moving forward. Night had fallen on the outskirts of Oryx 9, a place where the pale neon lights of the city could no longer reach. In a small makeshift corner of an abandoned warehouse, Dalen was quietly working, repairing the damaged cybernetic arm of Lysovine. His fingers were stained with grease and metal dust, while the other hand, warm and steady, rested gently on her wrist. It wasn't just for precision. It was an unspoken gesture, to anchor her, to remind her she wasn't alone. Lysovine sat in silence. Her silver eyes, once cold and sharp, now reflected the faint flickering light of the small lamp they had brought with them. And she watched Dalen, the only man who dared to come near her. Not out of fear, not out of control, but simply because he saw her as a human being. "You're not going to ask?" Her voice broke the stillness of the night. Dalen didn't even look up. "About what?" She let out a hollow, bitter laugh, the kind that carried exhaustion more than anger. "About my scars, about what turned me into this." He paused, tightened the final joint on her arm, then looked up, straight into her eyes. "If you want to tell me, I'll listen. If you don't, then those scars are still part of you, and I respect them." That night, the hollow sun drifted in a pale blue glow radiating from the control station. The silence was so profound it felt like one could hear the sound of their own heartbeat. Slow, steady, unbearably loud in the emptiness of space. Lysovine sat by the large observation window. Out there, the endless rivers of stars slid past so slowly, like fragments of old memories being dragged across the surface of her mind, refusing to fade. Dalen Voss approached, quietly, settling into the seat across from her. He didn't say a word. He didn't rush. There was only the quiet. Stretched between two souls who once belonged to worlds that could never intertwine. "Dalen." She spoke his name for the first time, her voice rough, dry, as though she'd gone her whole life never learning how to say something honest. "Have you ever thought that there are wounds that never heal?" Dalen looked at her, not with pity, but with the eyes of someone who had stood on the edge of survival far too many times. He didn't answer right away. And then, in the stillness, his low, husky voice broke the quiet like a soft echo across steel walls. "No wound heals completely, Lysovine. Not really. You just learn how to live with it, so it stops controlling you." She gave a faint smile, the kind without sound, as if such things, as if anyone had ever taught her that in the frozen halls of her royal past. She clenched her hands, feeling the new calluses building on her palms. The price of dragging herself day after day across the harsh metal floors of this ship. "Are you afraid?" she asked quietly. "Afraid of becoming someone you can't even recognize anymore?" Dalen leaned back, his eyes staring off into some distant memory. "I was," he admitted. "I used to be. But then I realized I'm not what the past left behind, and I'm not what someone else expects me to be. I am who I choose to be, every day, piece by piece." Lysovine fell silent. For the first time, she understood that perhaps the greatest strength a person could have wasn't power. It wasn't lineage, it wasn't legacy, it was the courage to face oneself, raw, exposed, without armor, without a throne, without a name. And then to choose your own path, even when your legs could no longer carry you forward. In the days that followed, Oryx-9 stirred like a monstrous machine on the verge of waking. Alien and Lysion, two souls without a homeland, without titles, were now fugitives beneath the industrial skeleton of this cold, ironclad city. Beneath layers of rusted concrete and tangled power lines lay shadowed corridors, narrow, suffocating, the air thick with the metallic stench of corroded steel pressing hard into their lungs. They moved through waste processing zones, past abandoned warehouses, down forgotten tunnels where the only light came from the blood-red glow of ancient warning signals. Remnants of a power grid long left to rot. Dalen Voss, once just a mechanic, a man who spent his life fixing broken things. Now he was leading Lysion, the girl who had once walked golden corridors in palaces of power, through darkness she had never known. We won't survive if we keep fumbling like this. His voice was hoarse, the sound of too many nights without rest. Lysion glanced down at her legs, the legs once deemed useless, but she knew. What kept her moving wasn't strength, it was will, it was survival, raw and primal, rising from somewhere deep inside her, a part of herself she never knew existed. "Is there a way out of this place?" she asked, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. Dalen nodded, a rare glint of determination cutting through the darkness in his eyes. "There is, but we'll have to pass through the old energy transit station beneath the city. That place, it's crawling with people like us, the discarded, the forgotten. But not everyone down there is willing to help." Lysion pressed her lips together. For the first time in her life, she understood. The world out here didn't care about rules. It didn't care about mercy. Out here, you either moved forward, or the darkness swallowed you whole. Their footsteps echoed down the dead arteries of this dying city, each step a fragile heartbeat, belonging to those who clung to life by the thinnest thread, fighting for one last taste of freedom. Oryx-9 never forgave traitors. But it was also here, in this place of rust and ruin, that the strongest souls were born. Souls who had nothing left to lose, except themselves. In the days that followed, Oryx-9 stirred like a monstrous machine on the verge of waking. Alien and Lysion, two souls without a homeland, without titles, were now fugitives beneath the industrial skeleton of this cold, ironclad city. Beneath layers of rusted concrete and tangled power lines lay shadowed corridors, narrow, suffocating, the air thick with the metallic stench of corroded steel pressing hard into their lungs. They moved through waste processing zones, past abandoned warehouses, down forgotten tunnels where the only light came from the blood-red glow of ancient warning signals. Remnants of a power grid long left to rot. Dalen Voss, once just a mechanic, a man who spent his life fixing broken things. Now he was leading Lysion, the girl who had once walked golden corridors in palaces of power, through darkness she had never known. We won't survive if we keep fumbling like this. His voice was hoarse, the sound of too many nights without rest. Lysion glanced down at her legs, the legs once deemed useless, but she knew. What kept her moving wasn't strength, it was will, it was survival. Raw and primal, rising from somewhere deep inside her, a part of herself she never knew existed. "Is there a way out of this place?" she asked, her voice steady despite the exhaustion. Dalen nodded, a rare glint of determination cutting through the darkness in his eyes. "There is, but we'll have to pass through the old energy transit station beneath the city. That place sits crawling with people like us, the discarded, the forgotten. But not everyone down there is willing to help. Lysovine pressed her lips together. For the first time in her life, she understood. The world out here didn't care about rules. It didn't care about mercy. Out here, you either moved forward, or the darkness swallowed you whole. Their footsteps echoed down the dead arteries of this dying city, each step a fragile heartbeat, belonging to those who clung to life by the thinnest thread, fighting for one last taste of freedom. Oryx 9 never forgave traitors. But it was also here, in this place of rust and ruin, that the strongest souls were born. Souls who had nothing left to lose, except themselves, beyond the old energy transfer station that Dalen had mentioned. Oryx 9 grew more twisted, more feral than ever before. Rusting steel doors chained shut with ancient power cables. Faint yellow light spilled from decaying energy conduits, not bright enough to comfort, only enough to cast long haunted shadows. Those who lived in this forgotten sector were no longer ordinary people. They were ghosts, shadows who could slit a throat for a scrap of bread, or spare a stranger's life with nothing but a word. Dalen and Lysovine were walking straight into another level of hell. This place, Dalen's voice was low, sharpened by countless scars of survival. This place isn't just home to the lost. It's crawling with Oryx 9's underground networks, bounty hunters, warlords, self-made syndicates. They won't hesitate to seize the chance if they discover us. His warning cut through the stale air, but Lysovine didn't flinch. Her gaze, and calm, cold one, was no longer the gaze of a princess raised behind gilded walls. She stared straight into the jaws of the night ahead, unblinking. How many entrances? How many exits? You led me in. You'd better have a way out. Dalen turned, and for the first time, looked at her with something like quiet respect, like he was seeing a new Lysovine, one that had shed her past faster than he thought possible. You've changed, he muttered. Faster than I expected. But Lysovine's reply was almost bitter, stripped clean of innocence. The dark doesn't wait for you to get used to it. You die, Stum, or you live long enough to stop waiting. And Oryx 9, that ancient iron-hearted beast of a world, it bowed its head, not for kings, not for warriors, but only for souls like them, the forgotten, the hunted, the ones who chose to survive, no matter the cost. That night, the air of Oryx 9 was thick like rusted iron. Lysovine sat with her back against the cold, corroded wall, her weary eyes watching Dalen Voss as he tinkered with a battered handheld sensor, its casing cracked and wires frayed with age. Silence, but both of them knew, whatever peace this moment held. It was draining away. Footsteps, heavy, metal, echoed closer. Somewhere above them, the distorted crackle of bounty hunter radios seeped through the shadows. Broken static, but clear enough to deliver its cold message. Imperial order, locate, capture alive. Lysovine Orvath, double reward for full recovery. Dalen's grip tightened around his makeshift weapon. His gaze flickered. No one on Oryx 9 was blind to the value of that name. A fallen Empire warrior, once undefeated, now reduced to the most expensive prize among the starving scavengers of this dying world. Lysovine remained silent, but her eyes no longer held the fear they once did. She knew, She saw it, the hesitation in Dalen's stare, and in that moment, a thin, almost invisible crack spread between them. "What are you thinking, Dalen?" Lysiane's voice cut through the stillness, not accusing, simply slicing straight to the truth. The mechanic lowered his head, gave a bitter, hollow chuckle. "Who am I, really? Just a man who broke rules to survive, a nobody, a scrap-born drifter without a home. When the Empire throws down enough credits, tell me, who wouldn't be tempted?" Wind whispered through the cracks in the steel, carrying the metallic stench of rust and decay. But Lysiane only exhaled slowly. "If you want to sell me, I won't blame you. Oryx 9 was built for that." Her words were weightless, soft, but sharp enough to cut like a blade pressed to his throat. Dalen looked at her, and for the first time in his scarred, exhausted life, he saw it, a flame, small, frail, but impossible to extinguish, a fire that refused to die. He gave a tired, crooked smile. "But here's the curse of it all." His voice rasped low. "I can't do it. Because when I look at you, I see my sister. The one who died breathing poison pumped through the vents of Oryx 9 by people just like the one you used to be." Dalen rose, yanking aside the tattered fabric that hid the entrance to an old maintenance tunnel. "We can't keep running forever, but if you're willing to trust me, I'll take you to the one place on Oryx 9 even the Empire's dogs are afraid to tread." Lysiane pulled herself upright, her legs aching, her body screaming from exhaustion. But her eyes met his without flinching. "You owe me nothing." Dalen's reply was cold, resolute. "No. But this time, I choose to stand with what's human." Outside, the bounty hunters began sweeping their searchlights through the narrow passages. Alarms shrieked, echoing across the bones of the dead city. But beneath the rusted skin of Oryx 9, two shadows began to move. No longer mere fugitives, but something far more dangerous. The kind of people who dared to break the cycle. The kind of people who chose to fight back. In a world that had long forgotten how. For 3 consecutive nights, fleeing through the decaying arteries of Oryx 9, Dalen and Lysiane moved like shadows, weaving through rusted corridors and abandoned industrial sectors. Where there was no light was where they survived. Lysiane's body grew weaker with each passing day. Old wounds, bruises, exhaustion pressing down on her muscles and will like iron chains stretched to breaking. But her eyes burned with an eerie clarity. No longer the princess once cradled along the marble halls of a royal palace. Now, a true survivor, something Oryx 9 could never forge but could never destroy either. Dalen watched her from behind. This woman had endured far more than what should have broken any human. "We're almost there. This place used to be an abandoned maintenance outpost. I've hidden some supplies there." Lysiane asked no questions. She merely nodded, taking another step forward, across the ruins of a civilization crushed beneath the heel of the Empire. But when they arrived, what Dalen had never expected awaited them. Inside the old station, their once secret refuge, there were traces. Fresh footprints, bloodstains smudged across the floor. Dalen drew his knife, his gaze sharp as tempered steel. But Lysiane did not retreat. She stepped straight in, her voice steady, unwavering. "If it's a trap, then I'll face it. I have nothing left to lose, except the life I've fought to reclaim." That sentence, like a blade, cut clean through the old shell of who she used to be. Dalen stared at her for a long moment. Then he let out a quiet laugh, half bitter, half in awe. After everything, you've truly been reborn, Lysovine, but as someone entirely new, someone far stronger than you ever were. The darkness of ORX-9 had never witnessed a survivor like this, one who had lost everything, yet still chose to stand and keep walking. That night, in the crumbling room of what used to be an old maintenance station, the small battery-powered lamp flickered weakly like the dying breath of a past long left behind. Dalen kindled a small fire in a hidden corner, its fragile light casting shadows across peeling walls, over old bloodstains, and upon the deep, silent eyes of Lysovine. She sat there, not with the posture of an exiled princess, but as a woman who had walked through the boundary of life and death. Dalen glanced at her hands, now rough, torn, calloused, marks that 10 days ago had never existed on her skin. He pulled out a small water canister from his pack, the very last of their dwindling supplies, and handed it to her. But Lysovine only took a small sip, then pushed it back toward him. Drink. You need the strength more than I do. Her voice no longer carried the weight of command from a past life of royalty. Nor was it the frail voice of someone waiting to be saved. It was the voice of someone who had chosen to stand as an equal, to share survival. Dalen let out a quiet laugh. In all my years on ORX-9, no one's ever said that to me. Everyone just wants to survive alone. Easier that way. Lysovine looked at him for a long time, then answered slowly, "That's because they don't realize. Living alone means nothing if your heart already died long before." Those words were not meant for him. They were meant for herself. And in that moment, Dalen understood. The real battle Lysovine had to fight was not against the Empire, not against her father, not against the mercenaries hunting them. It was against herself. He stood, stepping toward the ruined doorway, looking out across the desolate corridors. The night wind of ORX-9 blew cold, carrying the scent of rust and dust. But within that space, for the first time, Dalen sensed something different. This was no longer Lysovine, the abandoned princess, no longer a helpless prisoner. This was a new Lysovine, reborn from ruin, a woman learning once again to feel the world with bare hands, to see with eyes no longer blinded by power, and to walk with a heart that had finally learned how to ache. Tomorrow would not be easy, but tonight, ORX-9 bore witness to a true survivor being born anew, and this time, no one would extinguish her so easily again. The hideout at the edge of ORX-9 appeared like a forgotten scar carved deep into the ruins. It was once a fuel refinery, now reduced to nothing but rusted steel and shattered concrete. But to Dalen and Lysovine, this place was the most important destination since they escaped the claws of the Empire. The entrance was hidden behind an old corroded metal wall, a place only those of the Resistance knew how to unlock using a long-forgotten access code. Dalen stood before the door, his hand pressing against a crack in the surface, where a secret symbol of the Resistance had been carved long ago, like reaching out to a fragment of a memory left behind. "If they're still alive, they'll be waiting here," he whispered. Lysovine stared into the darkness beyond, a darkness that carried with it the ghosts of those who once fought for freedom, and then vanished from history as if they had never existed. The steel door groaned open, its ancient mechanism screeching like iron scraping bone, And beyond that door lay a different world. Faint lights powered by old batteries still flickered across the space. On the walls, symbols of the resistance still remained, silent signs of those who had never surrendered. And then they emerged. The soldiers, not the polished warriors clad in shining armor of the Empire, but people who had walked out of the living hell of Oryx 9, still breathing, still fighting, scarred both inside and out. The first to step forward was Zarek, the leader of the old resistance cell, a man who had lost an arm, replaced with a crude mechanical limb. But his eyes still cut as sharply as ever. Zarek stared long and hard at Dalen, then turned to look at Lysion, the woman who had once been a princess of their sworn enemy. "Dalen, you really survived? And who's this you've brought along?" Dalen nodded, his voice low and steady. "Someone who was once a victim of the Empire, just like us, but she's still alive and she never bowed her head." Zarek let out a harsh, rasping laugh, a sound mixed with exhaustion and bitter pride. "Then she's earned the right to stand here. Oryx 9 was never a place for the weak. If you've been thrown away by this world, and you're still standing, then you're already a warrior." Lysion stood silent. Her gaze no longer held fear, but the calmness of someone who had walked through the heart of pain and come out the other side. More soldiers began to step out from the shadows. Their faces were gaunt, their bodies marked with wounds. But in their eyes burned a light that the Empire had never been able to extinguish. The light of those who had lost everything, but still believed in something greater than themselves. And this was the truth Lysion touched for the very first time. The resistance was never the strongest army. It was made of souls that refused to die, names erased from history, but never truly gone. The air inside the hidden stronghold seemed frozen still as Dalen and Lysion followed Zarek deeper into the heart of the base. Every corridor they passed bore the scars of time, cracked walls, tangled cables, thick layers of dust, and symbols of the resistance hastily painted on every surface, with paint, with blood, with whatever remnants were left on Oryx 9. Dalen glanced at Lysion, the woman walking beside him. She moved slowly, her eyes quiet like frozen stone. But gone was the distance, the pride she once carried when they first met. And then, in the largest chamber, they met the survivors. Not proud soldiers, not warriors adorned with medals or polished armor, but living ghosts of a resistance era that had once been buried and trampled by history. There were those who had lost their eyes, replaced with crude sensor implants. There were those in makeshift wheelchairs, faces weathered far beyond their years. There were those missing arms, with scarred skin mapped like war-torn continents etched into their sunburnt bodies. But in their eyes, the light never faded. Zarek raised his hand, signaling for complete silence. "Dalen has brought someone worthy of being heard, not because of who she used to be, but because she survived. And here, on Oryx 9, survival means more than any metal ever forged." Dalen looked at Lysion. He didn't say another word. He left her to face them, on her own. And she, for the first time since leaving behind her frozen throne, stepped forward, standing before the circle of resistance fighters. Her voice was hoarse, but steady and clear. "I am Lysion. I was once the discarded daughter of the throne. But here, I am no princess. I am only someone who has survived. I do not beg for forgiveness. I do not seek to reclaim a lost title. I only wish to stand beside those who never knelt, not even once. No one spoke immediately. But then, an old soldier sitting in the darkest corner of the room, let out a raspy laugh. You speak one truth. Oryx 9 has no princesses here. There are only survivors, only souls that refuse to kneel. Welcome home, Lysion. Here, none of us ever belonged to a throne, and because of that, we are truly human. And for the first time, Lysiane understood what the word home truly meant. Not the place you were born into, but the place where people dared to live honestly, among scars no one else could see. Part 10, Legends and Scars, Section 1. When night fell over the resistant stronghold, a strange stillness settled over Dalen and Lysiane. No more roaring engines, no more tracking signals from the Empire's patrols. Only the quiet breathing of survivors, deep, steady, like the lives they had carved out through pain and defiance. Lysiane sat alone against the cold stone wall, the faint light of a small lamp casting shadows across her face, where bruises had begun to fade, but her eyes were still troubled. Dalen approached, holding 2 cups of hot water, a rare luxury in a place as barren and forgotten as Oryx 9. He didn't speak at first. He simply placed a cup beside her and sat down across from her. You're not sleeping? Dalen's rough voice broke the silence, low enough not to shatter the fragile peace between them. Lysiane shook her head slowly. I'm not used to this kind of quiet, she whispered. Back in the palace, there was always music at night, the sound of servants, the echo of power, but here, there's only myself, and scars no one else can see. Dalen looked at her for a long moment, and his gaze, it no longer carried the guarded edge from when they first met. It was the look of someone who understood, truly understood it, that anyone who walked through hell carried wounds far deeper than skin. Scars on the body. They heal easily, he said quietly, but the scars inside, only you can heal them. Lysiane gave a faint, bitter smile. You think I can heal? Her voice was dry. After everything I've lost, everything I left behind, I have nothing left to go back to, Dalen replied, slow and steady. Then build something new, not a throne, not a crown, something that belongs only to you. She fell silent for a long time. Then finally, softly, she said, No one's ever said that to me before. And in that moment, without music, without a crown, without a throne, here within this worn-down outpost, surrounded by cracked walls and fading paint, Dalen knew. A new legend was quietly being born. A legend of those who carried their scars and still stood. A legend of those who chose to keep living and chose to become their own salvation. The next morning, the resistance outpost still held that same heavy, suffocating silence. But deep inside Dalen, everything had changed. He watched Lysiane, the woman who had once been the embodiment of a sealed-off royal dynasty, now standing among those forgotten by the Empire. No more silk cloaks, no more regal gestures of a palace-born princess. Instead, there stood a quiet woman, her eyes no longer hiding the wounds carved into her soul. Together with Zarek, they stepped into the old storage chamber, the place where the resistance kept its most precious possession. Not weapons, not trophies, but memories. Along the corroded metal walls, names were carved deep into the rusted surface, the names of those who had fallen for one thing only, the belief in freedom. This, Zarek spoke, his voice rough and heavy like the weight of every name etched here. This is our true legacy. Not guns, not victories, but memory. The truth the Empire tried to bury forever. Dalen stood still. Lysiane moved closer to one section of the wall, where the name of a woman was carved. Kayla, mother of the underground. Who was she? Lysiane asked softly. Zarek stood behind her, his eyes dimming with the weight of memory. She raised an entire generation of orphans beneath Oryx 9, he answered. When the Empire's soldiers came, she stood between them and the children, and she fell. No medal, no royal funeral, but here, his voice dropped. She is a legend. And in that moment, Lysiane felt smaller than she ever had. She realized she was not the center of this world. Oryx 9 belonged to people who had never sat on a throne, but whose hearts were far greater than any ruler draped in gold. Slowly, she raised a hand, on her fingertips brushing against the ice-cold wall. And for the first time in years, what stirred in her heart wasn't guilt. It wasn't faded pride. It was gratitude. Dalen watched her in silence. He knew this moment would follow Lysiane for the rest of her life, because this was the beginning. The place where the forgotten found their names again, where those cast aside by power never stopped living, never stopped being truly human. The resistance stronghold was no longer silent. News flowed in, scattered signals from hidden outposts, from allies spread across forgotten worlds. The Empire's patrol squads had begun to deploy troops into Oryx 9, and the story of Dalen and Lysiane had already become legend. But every legend faces a question carved sharper than any blade. How many endings must there be before a true beginning can exist? Inside the war room, Lysiane, for the first time, placed the full map of Oryx 9 across the steel table. Not a map of power, not a map of palaces or fortresses, but a map of labor lines, a map of power grids, a map of wastelands where only the forgotten, the workers, and the voiceless had survived. We're not here to seize a throne. Lysiane's voice was rough, forged in exhaustion yet unshaken. We're here to destroy everything that forces people to kneel. Zarek glanced at Dalen, then turned his gaze back to Lysiane, the woman who no longer resembled the exiled princess from distant halls of gold. We don't have an army brimming with weapons, Zarek said, voice low but certain. But we have something far rarer. We have people who've forgotten what fear even feels like. On the wall behind them, the map of Oryx 9 flickered to life, old unstable technology sputtering with light. But every red dot glowing on that map wasn't just a location. Every dot was a scar, a hidden outpost, an ally in the shadows, a promise carved in blood, a spark waiting to ignite a storm. And Oryx 9, for the first time in its long broken history, was about to remember what it meant to fight for a future not built on thrones, but on freedom. That night, deep within the lowest chamber of the resistance stronghold, those who had once been called ghosts of forgotten history sat together once more, not to mourn the past, but to draw the shape of the future. Zarek unrolled the three-dimensional battle map. The image of Oryx 9's royal citadel shimmered into existence before them, dense with defensive lines, guard stations, restricted zones. But right at the heart of the city stood the throne hall, where King Rhaegar ruled, surrounded by the Empire's machinery of absolute control. We don't need to conquer that place, Dalen said quietly, his voice steady. We only need to do one thing: break it. Shatter the symbol of power that has chained this world for far too long. Lysovine stood before the map. Her eyes did not waver. No longer was she the frightened exile. On her face now was the sharp, cold resolve of someone who had once stood within the walls of royalty, and now had the courage to cast it all away. If we want to bring down the throne hall, we'll need to strike from 3 directions. Her voice was calm, a voice accustomed to command, yet reborn with purpose. One team will jam the Empire's entire communications grid. Another will attack the outer defenses head-on. And Dalen and I, we will infiltrate the very core, where the city's control system operates. Zarek looked at them. He nodded. This is not a suicide mission. This is a message to the world that even a throne can fall. No more words were needed. Everyone in that room knew. From this moment on, there was no turning back. That night, before parting ways to prepare for the plan, Dalen and Lysovine stood atop the resistance stronghold. They looked out across Oryx 9, the city drowning in a suffocating darkness that had lasted for generations. "What do you think? If we fail?" Lysovine asked softly. Dalen didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the distant silhouette of the colossal factory zones. "If we fail," he said quietly, "at least this world will know. There were those who refused to kneel. That once, there were people who stood up, even if they were just scraps tossed aside by the Empire's colossal machine." Lysovine was silent. Then, for the first time, she smiled. And this time, that smile held no bitterness, no sarcasm, just something raw and true. "Then we won't fight to survive. We'll fight to truly live." And beneath the night sky of Oryx 9, 2 souls who no longer belonged to royalty, who no longer belonged to the Empire, had chosen the only road left for the free, to fight to the very end. Dawn over Oryx 9. The city had yet to awaken from the tremors rumbling beneath its surface. Beneath layers of concrete and fields of rusted scrap metal, the resistance units were ready. Dalen stood beside Lysovine in the strike team formation. The pale glow of decaying neon lights stretched their shadows long across the narrow metal beams of the industrial corridors. On every shoulder, scars faded by time, signs of pain endured, marks carved deep from years of being crushed under oppression. Zarek passed by them, silent, moving like a seasoned ghost born of Oryx 9 itself. His words were few, but they cut through the tension like a blade. Time to move. Those who stay behind, well, are not the living, but the ones already wrestling death. The noise of engines starting, the sound of metal grinding against metal. Heavy footsteps echoing beneath the rust-choked underbelly of Oryx 9. It began. The longest night in the history of this cursed place was unfolding. No one here was who they used to be. No more titles, no more chains, only ghosts returned, ghosts rising from the dead to claim what was most sacred to humanity, the right to choose their own fate. Inside the heart of Oryx 9's imperial citadel, the very place the Empire believed to be untouchable, the ghosts, once erased from history, were returning. Under the gray, suffocating sky of Oryx 9, the alarm bells screamed like dying metal beasts. Steel clashed against steel. Explosions ripped apart the heavy silence. Zarek's decoy forces were striking hard at the broadcast stations, reclaiming the voices of memories long buried. Dalen and Lysovine moved like shadows, slipping through underground tunnels, drawing ever closer to the control center. Before them stood a monstrous machine, pulsating with crimson cables, alive with terrifying energy. Lysion placed her hand over her chest, feeling the frantic beat of her heart, just like the days when she still walked the golden halls of the palace. "This place once belonged to me," she whispered, "but today, I will be the one to destroy it." Dalen rested his hand firmly on her shoulder, his voice steady, without hesitation. "We destroy it, so no one after us will ever have to kneel before any throne again." All around them the resistance was gathering. Men and women who had long lived under the crushing weight of darkness. This was a battle with no retreat. Suddenly, across the entire Oryx 9 network, the broadcast system fell silent. Then, for the first time in countless years, the voices of the forgotten rose across the city. "We are those who were cast aside, ghosts in the pages of your history, but today we return for one reason only. No throne lasts forever." Oryx 9 froze. And then, from the deepest corners of the industrial wastelands, from cramped homes buried beneath steel towers, the first cries of defiance erupted. Shouts from laborers, cries from the forgotten, and in that moment, Oryx 9 crossed into a new era. The war of ghosts had begun. News of the uprising on Oryx 9 ignited like a spark, racing across every planet ruled by the Empire. No one could stop the truth now. Images of Lysion and Dalen standing atop the ruins of the Imperial throne, with the flag of the resistance fluttering against the backdrop of shattered power, bypassed every layer of censorship. On the mining planet of Paralyzed, where workers had been exploited down to their very bones, the old coal miners sat silently before their flickering monitors. Their weathered hands trembled as they stared at symbols they had thought erased from history forever. "It's real. The young ones were right. We are not alone." On Euralis, the military manufacturing world where weapons for the Empire were forged day and night, for the first time the machines fell silent. A young worker, his face stained with oil and soot, looked up at the broadcast screen and whispered with a voice on the edge of tears. "They stood up. That means we can too." And on Heliot, the agricultural planet where villages had been crushed by endless taxes, the once quiet fields roared to life, echoing with drums, with chants rising from crowds that had gathered for the first time in generations. A simple, direct message from Zarek, the resistance leader, spread across every hidden communication channel. No throne is eternal. No empire lasts forever. The time has come. This is the hour for those who once thought themselves the smallest. Rise. Take back what should have been yours long ago. Freedom. At the very heart of the empire, its generals and nobles began to panic. Their systems of control were collapsing. One territory after another lost communication. An old general, once the living symbol of imperial power, hurled his wine glass to the floor, his voice roaring through the halls. "We cannot lose to this rabble. They are nothing but nameless slaves." But in the shadows, amid emergency war councils and frantic orders, others quietly stepped away. Veteran soldiers, commanders who had once sworn absolute loyalty, now stood with the people, because they had come to understand something the Empire had refused to believe. Once the flame of freedom has been lit, no iron hand can ever crush it again. Oryx 9 was no longer a world of oppression. It had become a symbol, a call to arms, and from this moment forward, the galaxy would never be the same again. The final days on Oryx 9 were no longer days of battle. They had become days of rebuilding, days of choices, no longer made for pride or vengeance, but for tomorrow. Dalen stood atop the ruins of the fallen Imperial Palace. Wind swept through the broken halls, whistling past crumbling walls, carrying with it the fluttering banners of the resistance, glowing softly in the golden light of a world reborn. Beside him, Lysiane wore a repaired silver armor, plain, humble, her face serene in a way Dalen had never seen before. As if after everything lost, after every scar carved into her soul, the only thing that remained within her was freedom and the right to choose. Around them, the workers, the old soldiers, the forgotten survivors of this city of darkness, gathered together. They stood in silence, facing a question larger than any conqueror had ever dared to ask. What remains after a revolution? Lysiane's voice was quiet, almost lost to the wind. Dalen smiled faintly. Only those willing to keep walking forward, and the symbols, so no one ever forgets who they really are. Upon the shattered wall of the Imperial Palace, a new symbol was raised. Not a throne, not a crown, but a rusted iron pipe, Dalen's first weapon, and hanging from it, the broken mask of Lysiane, left behind during that fateful battle long ago. Not for glory, not for worship, but as a reminder that every one of us was once shackled in chains, and only people, have the right to break them. Zarek stepped forward, his voice resonating through the hollow remains of the old world. We don't need a throne. We don't need an emperor. What we need are those who dare to remember who they truly are in this world. From this day forward, Oryx 9 was no longer merely the name of an oppressed world. It had become a symbol, a warning. And the final legacy of those who broke their chains was carved into the heart of every survivor and every future soul who would hear their story. Power is not for domination. Power is to protect the right to choose for every free being in this universe. They can rebuild a city. They can raise monuments. They can rewrite history however they wish. But there are things that can never be erased. The memory of those who once dared to rise, who dared to break their chains. The memory of people, small, ordinary, who chose not to bow. Oryx 9 is no longer the name of a slave world. It is a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, there will always be those willing to light the smallest flame. And sometimes, it is exactly those small flames that burn down an entire empire.